to, and you've been doing it for so long now, William, you were away from the group for a few years, back for decades. What's it like to just open your mouths and know that you know each other's voices so well? Teacher used to call a ringing chord that's so familiar.
I feel like it's the vocal sounds that we all bring to the table that makes that sound that no other group has that, you know. Well, if you need it, got everything you need. Got everything a poor man needs. If it's money, got everything you need. Joe has more of a rock and roll voice and a rock and roll influence in his voice. Now, Dwayne is more traditional gospel. You know, he majored in music in college and studied voice. And Richard, he also had music in college and had voice in college. But I grew up in country and I had no real voice.
You were in Alabama.
Yeah, so I still sing the way I sing, when I kind of sing from the heart more than what's written on paper.
That's William Lee Golden. He of the, as we said, stupendous white beard and the Oak Ridge Boys. We've also been talking to Richard Sturban. He of the spectacular bass voice. Richard, William, we want to thank you both so much for talking about the new album, and best of luck on your tour.
Thank you. Thank you.
The album 17th Avenue Revival will have the tour posted at hereandnow.org. Eastern State Penitentiary supports WHYY and hosts a new participatory art exhibit, Photo Requests from Solitary. This project invites men and women held in long-term solitary confinement in U.S. prisons to request photographs of anything at all, real or imagined, and invites volunteer photographers to make the images. This and 12 other artist installations are included with admission to the historic site. Learn more at easternstatepenitentiary.org.
I'm John Dankowski. On the next Science Friday, 50 years ago, hundreds of audience members walked out of the first screening of a weird new film.
I'm afraid that...
We look at the journey to create 2001: A Space Odyssey. Plus, we'll eavesdrop in on the chatty world of the bowhead whale. That's on Science Friday from PRI.
Funding for Here and Now comes from the listeners of WBUR Boston and your NPR station. From Exact Sciences, offering Cologuard for average-risk adults over 50, a non-invasive colon cancer screening test that can be used at home, by prescription only. Information at cologuardtest.com. And MathWorks, creators of MATLAB and Simulink software for technical computing and model-based design. MathWorks, accelerating the pace of discovery in engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com.
This is Here and Now. The Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo has spread to the city of Mbandaka, and the World Health Organization says the risk to the public in that country is very high, but that the outbreak is not yet a global health emergency. Dr. Tom Frieden was the director of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention during the Ebola outbreak in West Africa in 2014 through 2016. That was a global health emergency. He's now the president and CEO of Resolve to Save Lives, and he joins us by Skype. Dr. Frieden, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And how concerned are you that the Ebola virus has now apparently spread to a city, Mbandaka?
It's certainly concerning. Urban Ebola is substantially different from rural Ebola. It's very challenging to identify all of the contacts of people who develop Ebola in urban areas.
And how likely is it, once it reaches an urban area, that somebody gets on a plane and takes it out of the country?
It's certainly possible that Ebola will spread, We are not seeing anything like the kind of widespread transmission of Ebola in DRC at this point that we saw in West Africa. And we have a series of advantages. In particular, that DRC has a stronger public health system. So they have skilled epidemiologists, they have access to laboratory testing, they have dealt with Ebola effectively many times before, and we have a vaccine. And we should talk about that a bit more because that's important, but it's not as important as may initially be the impression. So there is still the possibility of further and substantial spread.
I want to talk to you about the vaccine, but first, just because it's been a few years since the last Ebola outbreak, just remind us briefly about this virus, how it spread, and why it's so deadly.
Ebola is what's called a hemorrhagic fever virus. It spreads from person to person by close contact with body fluids. So it particularly spread in parts of Africa where there are funeral traditions of washing the body. People who have died from Ebola have extremely high concentrations of the virus in their body fluids, and that was a major way that disease has been spread in past outbreaks. It's also spread in healthcare facilities. Tragically, the health workers who are helping people who are sick with Ebola may contract it and potentially die from it. And it can kill anywhere from 30 to 60% of the people who develop infection with Ebola. We have learned more about how to treat it effectively, but there's no specific treatment, and unfortunately, it remains one of the most fatal of all infectious diseases.
Well, tell us about the vaccine then. What is it? How does it work? And is it going to be effective this time?
We think the vaccine can be effective for people who get it in time, and it's one tool in a comprehensive approach. The bigger picture here is 4 years after the emergence of Ebola in Guinea in March of 2014, we still don't have a way of quickly finding and stopping Ebola when it first emerges. We need to do better at helping countries track Ebola and other deadly infections where and when they emerge to protect them, their neighboring countries, and the world.
How do we do that?
Well, we've made a lot of progress improving the assessment of how ready countries are to find, stop, and prevent health threats from emerging and spreading. We've identified literally thousands of life-threatening gaps in preparedness, and the CDC and WHO and other organizations have begun to basically chip away at those important gaps so that they can stop them there by being stronger there so we're safer here in the U.S. But those efforts are going to take time, and it's crucially important that the U.S. Congress continues to fund the CDC so they can expand those efforts and continue them. The U.S. doesn't have to do it alone, but if we leave the field, the microbes will have the upper hand.
We remember during the last outbreak, President Obama hugged an Ebola survivor at the White House. He was criticized for that. There's now a Republican representative in Florida who said he regrets attacking the president for that the U.S. actually handled Ebola very well. What do you think?
One thing that was absolutely clear was that there was no way we could reduce the risk in the U.S. without stopping the disease at the source in West Africa. The response from CDC was actually the largest response in CDC history. We sent more than 1,400 staff to Ebola-affected areas. They spent more than 80,000 work days. They went to virtually every community where the disease was spreading. We set up high-throughput laboratories in remote rural areas that worked for more than 420 days without a break and tested more than 25,000 specimens. So it was a very intensive response. And what we need to do now is use this as a reminder that we will all be safer if we help other countries build their own systems so that they can find and stop diseases when and where they emerge.
That's Dr. Tom Frieden, who is the former director of the CDC and now the president and CEO of Resolve to Save Lives. Dr. Frieden, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And Here and Now is a production of NPR and WBUR in association with the BBC World Service. I'm Jeremy Hobson.
I'm Robin Young. This is Here and Now. Funding
for Here and Now comes from Landmark College, serving students who learn differently with faculty specializing in LD support, associate and bachelor's degrees, transitional bridge semesters, and summer programs for college and high school students. More at ldbridge.org.
Science Friday coming up next after news here on WHYY.
Mercy Accountable Care supports WHYY. Mercy Accountable Care provides primary care physicians with tools designed to help them succeed in providing value-based care. Population health data, evidence-based strategies, and a multidisciplinary support team help identify opportunities to improve patient care and outcomes while reducing costs, so physicians can share savings and reinvest to strengthen their practices for the future. Learn more at mercyhealth.org/ACO.
McCarter Theater Center in Princeton supports WHYY and presents the Regeneration Tour, Arlo Guthrie's follow-up to his 50th anniversary tour for Alice's Restaurant. Guthrie hits the road with 2 generations of his family, singing not only his own songs, but those of his dad, Woody Guthrie. Arlo's Regeneration Tour is in the spirit of an American family making music together. Arlo Guthrie and his family will be at McCarter Theater Center on Saturday, May 18th at 8 p.m. Ticket information at mccarter.org.
And taking a look at the forecast, rain, go away. Well, not until Tuesday. Periods of rain, a high near 65.
This is WHYY FM, Philadelphia, WNJN FM, 89.7 Atlantic City, WNJZ, 90.3 Cape May Courthouse, WNJB FM, 89.3 Bridgeton, WNJM, 89.9 Manahawkin, and WNJS FM, 88.1 Berlin.
Also, the consequences of bullying, they can last a lifetime. A man in his 70s sought out the sisters he bullied in grade school and heard the results.
It's hard for me to make friends today. It's hard for me to get close to somebody. I feel like I don't belong. Even today I feel this way.
And there are lots of Americans in Windsor, England for tomorrow's royal wedding.
I'm here today because we're going to have an LA princess, and all my life I've been told about fairy tales, and now I'm going to see a real one.
Coming up here and now.
The news is first.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Students again find themselves the victims of a mass school shooting, this time in the Texas city of Santa Fe. Investigators are on the scene. So far, they're confirming at least 8 people were killed in the gunfire. Most of the victims are believed to be students. At least 1 educator has also been killed. Houston Public Media's Florian Martin talked to a student who recounted the horrific moments of huddling in a classroom while he listened to the shooting rampage unfold.
They heard, he said it was about 20 shots from what he thought was a shotgun. And they immediately barricaded the door and stayed in the classroom for an hour, and were then evacuated to a junior high school nearby.
Florian Martin reporting on a student who also said that he was in disbelief that he was in the middle of the kind of carnage that he'd been hearing about in the news at other schools. Well, that includes Parkland, Florida, site of the Valentine's Day massacre. Parkland students have since spearheaded a nationwide movement for safer schools, tougher gun measures, and more accountability among elected officials and law enforcement. In Cuba, fire and rescue crews are responding to the scene where a Boeing 737 went down today near Havana's Jose Marti Airport. The flight, operated by the state airline Cubana, crashed on takeoff. No word on casualties. The plane was on a domestic flight with 104 people on board, according to media reports quoting state-run TV. The Attorney General of New Jersey is offering to take over federal investigations of abuses by for-profit colleges and universities. Joe Hernandez from member station WHYY says this follows word that the U.S. Education Department is unwinding a unit set up to look into the misdeeds.
New Jersey Attorney General Gurbir Grewal has a simple message for Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. If you won't investigate for-profit college abuses, let us. In a letter to DeVos, Grewal says U.S. Education Department officials have stopped cooperating with his staff. Graywall says that's making it harder for former students in New Jersey to cancel their student loans with the now-defunct Corinthian colleges. The for-profit Corinthian colleges closed in 2015 after it was determined to have deceived student borrowers. The letter from the New Jersey AG comes after the New York Times reported that the Education Department was shutting down a unit created under the Obama administration to investigate abuses by for-profit colleges and universities. For NPR News, I'm Joe Hernandez.
Former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, who is now President Trump's attorney, says the special counsel spearheading the probe into Russia's interference in the presidential election has narrowed the scope of questions that you might ask Trump. Giuliani tells CNN the questions covering 5 subject areas have been reduced to 2. The Dow is up a fraction of a point. This is NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include C3 IoT, providing a software platform that enables organizations to deploy artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, and IoT solutions at industrial scale. Learn more at c3iot.ai.
Good afternoon, I'm Tom McDonald, WHYY News. Pennsylvania farms have been plagued by worker shortages over the past several years. It has some looking for a federal program for help, but as Rachel McDevitt reports for WHYY, such a move comes with its own set of problems.
The H-2A visa allows foreign workers to come into the country for seasonal work. Farmers who participate agree to provide transportation, housing, and a set wage. Chris Bacher is the orchard manager at Adams County Nursery, which started using the program 2 years ago after a particularly bad season.
I let at least 5,000 bushels of apples go on the ground.
While Bacher has been happy with the workers, he says the program itself is antiquated, expensive, and full of delays. He says farmers don't know if their workers' visas have been approved until a few days before they're needed on site. Then they have to buy plane tickets at the last minute.
We could save at least half the price of travel expenses if we could be assured when they were going to come and could buy the tickets a month out.
He has an order for workers to arrive in July in the hopes they will be approved in time for the August harvest. Rachel McDevitt in Harrisburg.
Pennsylvania House Republicans are moving to take away committee assignments from a member accused of abusing 2 women who dated him, one of whom was a fellow lawmaker. The House Republican leadership team sent a member Thursday to House members saying they'll ask the panel that oversees committee assignments to strip them from Delaware County Representative Nick Miccarelli. The memo accuses Miccarelli of repeatedly violating caucus policy against retaliation. His accusers are Republican Representative Tara Toohill and a Harrisburg lobbyist. Their accusations became public in late February. Miccarelli says he's innocent of the accusations, but his spokesman says he has no choice but to accede to the leader's action. Periods of rain, a high near 65 today. Rain likely tonight, a low near 53. Periods of rain tomorrow, a high near 71. Sunday, thunderstorms, a high near 82. 60 degrees in Philadelphia, Wilmington at 206.
This is Science Friday. I'm Ira Plato, coming to you today from the studios of 90.5 WESA in beautiful downtown Pittsburgh. Just how memories are formed, stored, retrieved in the brain, it is still a mystery. The prevailing theory is that changes in the connections between neurons, our synapses, encode our experiences. But this week, researchers reported a surprising finding about memory in snails. What does that mean? Well, joining us to talk about it and other science news from the week is Amy Nordrum, news editor at IEEE Spectrum. She's in our New York studios. Welcome back, Amy.
Thanks, Ira.
So what's going on with this memory story?
Yeah, this new research out of UCLA could upend some of the current existing theories on how memories are formed and stored in the brain. As you said, the common theory has been that the connections between the neurons matter most, but this research suggests that maybe neurons themselves store, or at least have a role in storing, memories once they're formed in our brains. This research was done with snails, marine snails. Researchers at UCLA were able to extract RNA from one set of snails that they had applied electrical shocks to and show increased sensitivity in another group of snails that had not ever received those shocks. So it's also a form of learning, but these researchers are saying that this suggests that RNA plays a more important role in forming memories than we previously thought.
And how did they know that the memories were moved or at?
Well, they actually were able to then test sensitivity in the snails that received the RNA that had never been shocked before. And they used this organ called the siphon that can push out and pump in water to and from the snail's body. And after the snails received shocks, they exhibited a longer response time in being sensitive to basically a poke of that organ. So they would extract it into their body, and then there was a longer time that it took them to recover. And then the snails that they injected the RNA into that had never been shocked before showed a very similar response.
You know, of course, this sort of upsets an apple cart, as you mentioned, about how we think how memories are formed. So this must be quite controversial, and people are looking to redo it, right?
Absolutely. It would need to be replicated to say anything really meaningful. And of course, this is in snails, not anywhere near humans yet. The researcher David Glansman told me it took him months to even convince his own lab to do this work. So it's definitely outside the box thinking.
All right, let's go on to the next one. There's a new version of the pale blue dot picture looking back on our planet from far away. Tell us how that came about.
That's right. NASA released a new image this week, and it's connected to the InSight lander that is headed for Mars. Will arrive there in November. But alongside InSight are two tiny satellites. They're flying along for the mission. These are CubeSats. So I know you've talked about CubeSats on the show before. These two CubeSats are going deeper into space than ever before. Usually CubeSats are relegated to the low Earth orbit area. They're used for all kinds of satellite imagery up there. But these two CubeSats have been turning deep into space. You know, part of the challenge of going to Mars is getting all the data back from there. And these CubeSats are playing an important role, hopefully, in being able to send, through specially designed antennas, data all the way back from Mars once they arrive there.
So it's not just it's just a great picture of the pale blue dot, but it's also significant about the CubeSats unfolding properly.
Yeah, the whole way we got that photo is one of the CubeSats taking a photo of itself to show that this antenna had unfolded properly, which happily it has.
That's great. So you have an antenna the size of a bread box sending data back from near Mars. Isn't that something?
Yeah,
Tiny little.
It's pretty remarkable. And the advantage is this is a much cheaper way than sending, much bigger satellites and antennas deep into space like that.
Yeah. Let's move on to a story about chemical warfare and caterpillars and plants.
It's a crazy world down there. Yeah, plants, when a herbivore like a caterpillar starts to attack them, plants can emit these compounds that are sort of a defense against the herbivore. But it seems through some new research that caterpillars may have found a way to use these plant defenses to their own advantage, because some new research suggests the relationship is more complicated. Not only are the compounds meant to deter the herbivores from eating further, but the herbivores themselves are kind of protected by the compounds, because other predators like wasps do not like to approach a caterpillar that has the smell of these compounds on it. So it actually keeps the caterpillar safe from its own predators, even though the whole point is to defend from the caterpillar in the first place.
So they're sort of making the chemicals that would deter the caterpillars themselves?
Absolutely, yeah. So the plant is emitting these compounds, these chemicals that are very aromatic in this case, this one that was studied, and then the caterpillar starts to smell like that, but then the wasps don't really like it either. So I don't know if that's really working to the plant's full advantage there.
Another story next week is one of the world's largest robotics conference, and you've got your eye on that, right?
Absolutely. Some announcements have started to come out. We'll hear a lot more next week, but there are some fun prototypes and interesting experiments that are going to be on show there in Brisbane next week. One of them is a tiny robot called RoboFly. This is a robot about the size of a fly. It even has its own wings, and it can barely take off. One of the things that is innovative about this particular robot is the way that it's powered. When you try to scale a robot down that small, it's very hard to get a reliable power source on board. So the researchers here at the University of Washington attached a PV cell and then shine board. When you try to scale a robot down that small, it's very hard to get a reliable power source on board. So the researchers here at the University of Washington attached a PV cell and then shined a laser onto it. So the PV cell was able to harvest enough energy from that laser to do a small liftoff. The only problem is as soon as it goes outside the range of the laser beam, it falls back to the ground.
Details.
It's only a prototype.
So what are some of the big questions at the conference?
Yeah, things like power, certainly mobility, and then also, practical tasks. Like there's a research group out of Georgia Tech that's built a robot that they're trying to design to dress humans. You can imagine a lot of people need help getting dressed in the morning and undressed at night. And this robot hopefully could help with that someday. But right now, the most it can really do is put a sleeve on someone's arm, and it takes about 10 seconds to do that. It's a very delicate process to work with humans, and it could be very valuable, but we're kind of inching close to that.
Let's now go to the most important story of the week. Researchers looking into the optimal age for puppy cuteness.
That's right. Researchers at Arizona State University did what must have been one of the most fun experiments ever as a college student to participate in. They're interested in this question of how the animal-human relationship evolves. And one thing they know is that most of the dogs on the planet are not pets. They, in fact, live on the street. They're sort of part wild, but they still depend on humans a lot. You know, it's street dogs in big cities. And so they wanted to know, how is this relationship forming? They took a bunch of images, asked some students to categorize them according to cuteness on a scale from 1 to 100 of different puppies. And they found that the age at which the puppies appealed most to humans was about 8 weeks. This is interesting because that's also the age at which dogs are weaned from their mother, typically. And so if you're a street dog and you're weaned from your mother at 8 weeks old, you're still not big and strong enough maybe to find food on your own. It could be a real advantage to have your maximal cuteness at that particular age, so that a human would take you in, or at least, throw some food out for you.
All these young puppies are listening. So, thank you, Amy. Amy Nordrum, news editor at the IEEE Spectrum in New York. Thanks for joining us this week.
Thanks, Ira.
And now it's time to check in on the state of science.
This is KER WWNO, St. Louis Public Radio, Iowa Public Radio News.
Local stories with a national impact. If you're a fan of cycling in the city, and who is not, you know that not all bike lanes are created equal. And now there's an app that'll give you not only your fastest route to work, but also maybe the safest way to get there. Here to tell us more about this is WESA reporter Joaquin Gonzalez. Joaquin, welcome to Science Friday.
Thank you, Ira.
Congratulations are in order. You're a citizen today.
Yeah, that's right. Just as of this morning. So.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Let's talk about this app. It's called the Lane Spotter. Is that right?
Yes, Lane Spotter.
And how does that work?
So it's a little bit similar to the apps like Waze or Google Maps used for navigation. So the interface does look like a map, and users can go on there and create a route or directions to cycle from point A to point B. And a similarity with Waze is that they can actually see what you might call alerts, which are instances where another user has flagged some kind of road condition, which could be, like a closure or construction. Here in Pittsburgh, a lot of times it's potholes, which we're kind of notorious for.
Yeah, I hate it when that happens, when you hit a pothole.
It's maybe even scarier than when you're in a car. Yeah. But maybe the key thing with Lane Spotter is that it also lets users create safety ratings for any road. So not just trails or not even just roads with bike lanes, but really any street. And they can give it a rating from very safe to avoid on a 5-point scale. And so what Lane Spotter actually does is when it's creating a route or directions for you, it takes those safety ratings into account once a certain amount have been created, and it tries to optimize your route, and it gives you, sort of the best combination of the most direct route and the safest route.
Mm-hmm. Is this something that the bicyclists have always wanted, or are they always looking for an app like this?
Yeah, so the app's founder, her name is Lindsay Campbell. She's a longtime cyclist and bike commuter. She's done this in multiple cities, and she's gotten to know a lot of other cyclists. So, she's pretty well attuned to their needs, I would say. Two big concerns, or maybe motivations, that she brought up when we spoke were, the first one was that there's varying levels of skill and experience among cyclists. And this is especially true as cycling becomes more popular and things like bike shares become more popular. Increasingly that's going to include a lot of beginners. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing is that from street to street, there's also varying degrees of difficulty and safety from one street to another. And that can be the case even when there's bike lanes. So just because a road has a bike lane doesn't necessarily mean that it will be the easiest or safest ride. And when we spoke, Lindsay gave me an example of this using a stretch of road here in Pittsburgh.
My example of this in Pittsburgh is Forbes Avenue between Braddock and South Dallas. There's a bike lane there, but there's also 4 lanes of traffic going 50 in a 35-mile-per-hour zone.
Wow, it's pretty dangerous, right? You don't want to be in that kind, so that so then you can look at the app and it'll tell you stay out of that.
Right, exactly.
So this is for working people who are commuting to work, right?
It's for both. It's for bike commuters, casual bikers. Really, how Lindsay described it is anybody who rides a bike, she wants them to have this resource.
So the users of the app are having safer experiences? Are they reporting the app is helping them?
Yeah, I believe so. So Lindsay said she's gotten a lot of positive feedback, and also maybe user involvement is a good way to gauge, how useful people are finding it. So Lane Spotter has been able to partner with bike advocacy groups, not just here in Pittsburgh, but in a handful of larger cities around the country. So what you're seeing now is that cities like New York, San Francisco, St. Louis, Cleveland, and a handful of others are pretty well mapped out with their safety ratings.
You know, I guess besides bicyclists, I guess if you're a motorist too, I'm thinking about this now. You might, look at it and see what roads that the bicyclists are going to be on, and maybe be a little bit more careful when you drive on.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but I think that's really true. The dynamic obviously on a motorcycle is much closer to what you see on a bike versus being in a car.
Okay, well, Joaquin, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Ira.
Joaquin Gonzalez, reporter for WESA here in Pittsburgh. And we're going to take a break. When we come back, what's stronger than steel, conducts electricity better than copper, and is making waves in the world of biomedicine? We're going to talk about graphene. Yeah, we've talked a lot about it. We'll talk about another possible use for it. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this break. This is Science Friday from WNYC Studios.
Hey everybody, this is Jad Abumrad from Radio Lab. I want you to take a second to think about the way that you feel when you turn on this radio station. Think about what it feels like when